Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Lilienthal. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition and a member of the committee that helped plan this event. I've also represented the New Jersey chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association on the coalition. It's my privilege to welcome all of you to today's vital policy discussion. As you may know, the coalition is dedicated to the pursuit of sensible, evidence-based, and bipartisan immigration policy. Our work, we believe, takes on greater importance in the current political environment when misinformation and misunderstanding on immigration-related topics are common. The question that we are examining today is one that has surfaced many times throughout American history. Does immigration help or hurt American workers? Or maybe the better way to ask the question is, under what circumstances does it help, and under what circumstances does it hurt American workers? We're discussing these questions on the eve of a new administration in Washington that will likely also grapple with this question. While the Trump administration will initially focus its attention on curbing illegal immigration, the need for legal immigrants will not disappear and may actually intensify during the next 4 years. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, the law firm of Genova Burns. Without the support of our sponsors, it would be impossible for the coalition to organize programs like this one. It is my great pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Professor Zeke Hernandez of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Professor Hernandez is an award-winning scholar who has spent his career studying how immigrants affect our lives and livelihoods. He has won numerous emerging scholar awards, and his recent book entitled The Truth About Immigration has received glowing reviews. His research is filled with results that will surprise both liberals and conservatives. Wherever you stand ideologically, his book will challenge you to rethink some of your views and to reconsider the potential contributions of immigrants to our economy. It is a privilege to have Professor Hernandez as our opening speaker. Before I turn the floor over to him, I'd like to remind our audience that we have set aside 10 minutes at the end of today's program to respond to any questions or comments you might have. We encourage you to put your questions or comments in the chat box as soon as they pop up in your head, or you might forget them as we move along with the program. Thank you again, Professor Hernandez, for joining us today, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Really kind introduction. And thanks to all of you for being here. I never take it for granted that you've invested over an hour of your time in the middle of the day to listen to any speaker, including myself. So I'm really grateful. I'm just going to take 1 second here to tee up a few slides that I want to share. So I'm really excited for this event, and there's a very specific reason for it. In addition to the fact that you're here, it's that this is an audience that is focused on business. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that I am here as a business school professor to talk about immigration, but I'm surprised that often we think about this issue as a political issue or a social issue, but not a business issue. And actually, properly understood, immigration is fundamentally about business and industry. That's why I'm particularly excited for this one here. Now, I only have 15 minutes, so in 15 minutes, the best I can do is offer some framing and orienting remarks, and to try to answer this fundamental question that Ryan mentioned and that is framing this conversation. Now, to do that, we need sort of a framework to understand how immigrants affect us economically in general, right? Only then can we really answer the question of how immigrants affect workers. So let me begin with some high-level stuff, and then we'll save the particulars for the question and answers and the panel. Look, when it comes to immigration in this country and in every country, one of the things that I've observed in the last decade of presenting to many audiences about this is that we pretty much fall into a false dichotomy between two views of immigration. The first is the view of immigrants as villains who are here to hurt us. This is very familiar in political campaigns. And the other is the view of immigrants as victims who deserve our compassion. And so much of what we talk about when it comes to immigration comes down to this idea of fear and pity. Do we favor insiders or outsiders? And this is simply a false trade-off. Okay. Now, when it comes to the economy specifically, this fear versus pity false trade-off that I just mentioned is manifested in a very specific lay model that the average person has about immigrants and the economy. And this is well expressed in a meme that a student sent me some time ago. It's the meme of Schrodinger's immigrant. The idea that immigrants are simultaneously collecting all the welfare, but also somehow taking all the jobs. And they're doing both of these contradictory things at the same time, right? And so this is the way most people think about immigrants, and it's why we end up asking questions like the one today: are immigrants hurting native workers? Okay. Now, this is based on two fundamentally false assumptions. Okay. And I'm going to spend the time explaining what those assumptions are and what a better way to think about it is based on the evidence. The first assumption is that an immigrant, when they arrive in the economy, they contribute only or primarily their labor. They fill a job, okay? And some people think that that job comes at the expense of a native, and others hope that it doesn't. And the other false assumption is that a worker is a worker is a worker regardless of their origin. That is, an immigrant and a native as a worker are perfectly interchangeable bodies that fill a job position in the labor market. Okay. And when you make these two assumptions, you end up with something like the Schrodinger's immigrant model of immigrants in the economy. Let me explain why this doesn't hold up to evidence. Let's start with just some basic common sense. If you think of any person, think of just yourself in terms of how do you interact with the economy. It's preposterous to say that you only bring your labor or your talent to the economy. I mean, absolutely, yes, you fill a job, right? But you do at least four other things. You bring your talent, okay? But what else do? You consume, right? You spend your paycheck on goods and services. You also pay taxes. If you're saving for retirement or maybe investing in a business or something like that, you're also an investor. And some of us or some of you might have a good idea that turns into a product or a service or a new technology. So many people are also innovators in the economy. Okay, this is what I call the big five inputs that any person brings to an economy. And by the way, the only way you're going to get jobs, right, because we're talking about jobs fundamentally, is from those inputs. There is no other source that good jobs are going to come from. Now, as it turns out, an immigrant is a person too. And so what happens when immigrants arrive to your economy, think of your neighborhood or your state or your country, okay, they bring these five things too. Okay, at least as a group they do. And so what you get when immigrants arrive is you get a greater quantity of those five fundamental inputs. What that means is that the economic pie is larger because of the arrival of a group of immigrants. There is more of each of those five things. Okay, this is true, by the way, for all kinds of immigrants, legal and undocumented, humanitarian or otherwise. But there's more than that because immigrants are not identical to native-born people. Okay, I'm going to illustrate that with illustrating them here in a different color. Immigrants, they're different in how they bring these five inputs. For example, if you take consumption, immigrants have different tastes and preferences. Okay, if you take talent, immigrants bring different skills. They've been trained a little bit differently. They solve problems a little differently. If you think of investment, immigrants are interested in investing in different kinds of businesses. They connect to different investment networks and sources of capital, many of them from their home countries. And they also innovate in a different way because they bring interest in different ideas and technologies and products and services. And so what happens is that you not only get a greater quantity of these five inputs when immigrants arrive, okay, that is the economic pie grows, you get a greater variety of these five things. So that results in a bigger and more diversified economy. And bigger and more diversified economies create more jobs, more differentiated jobs, and better jobs for everybody. This is the correct model of how immigrants affect the economy. This is what research tells us. Okay. Now, that's very high level. In the 10 minutes or a little bit less that I have, let me try to illustrate how this actually works. What does the evidence tell us? And what are examples of those five things? Now, I don't have time to cover all five, but let me cover two or three of them, okay? So let's begin with investment, okay? This is a headline that caught my attention early in 2023, not that long ago. I live in Pennsylvania, not too far from where I think most of you are located. And it caught my attention that a company, a chip component maker, invested $300 million and created two highly skilled manufacturing jobs in hometown Pennsylvania. Now, you've probably never been there, but hometown Pennsylvania is small. It has a population of about 3,500 people. It's far from any major urban center. It's just not the kind of place where you would expect this kind of investment and these kinds of jobs. And so I did a little bit of digging to find out what's really going on here. And there's basically two things you need to know. The first is that Hometown was founded by German immigrants in the mid 1800s. Okay. And it was a town that spoke only German for several decades. It has a strong German heritage. The other is that the company that made this investment, EMD Electronics, is a subsidiary of a German corporation, Merck KGaA. Now, what do those two things have to do with each other? It's no coincidence that a company from Germany is investing capital and creating jobs in a location with a heritage of German immigration. I know from the research I've done and the research that many others have done that basically immigrants are a leading indicator of where investment is going to flow. That is, companies from a certain country are more likely to invest in locations that have either a historical or current wave of immigration from that country. And those investments create jobs just like EMD Electronics did in hometown Pennsylvania. So if you pay attention to where investment is flowing from overseas where you live, chances are that it's flowing from countries that have a historical or more current heritage of immigrants from that country. But there's more than this. Immigrants not only attract investment from their home countries, they put their own investment in businesses that they start directly. Research tells us that immigrants are 80% more likely to start businesses than native-born people. This is a chart from a study done by my colleague Danny Kim here at Wharton that shows that number, that 80% that I just mentioned. But it also shows something else that's very interesting. What the vertical axis of this chart shows is the rate of entrepreneurship for natives and immigrants. And notice that the rate of startup or business creation is higher for immigrants across the entire chart. Okay, that is, immigrants are more likely to start businesses. But if you look at the horizontal axis, which shows the number of jobs that those businesses create 5 years after they're started, you see that whether it's a tiny 0 to 3 person business like your corner restaurant or mom and pop shop, or a very large businesses like Google, Zoom, Duolingo, Pfizer, Colgate, any kind of business you can imagine, many of them in the Fortune 500, the businesses that immigrants start create more jobs at all size levels than native founded businesses. Why is this so important to our question today? Because we often think of immigrants and jobs as immigrants competing directly with native for jobs. This is the Schrodinger's immigrant thinking. But in reality, you have to understand what I call the immigrant investment jobs triangle. Immigrants arrive, they increase the stock of capital investment in the communities where they live, and that creates jobs. And most of those jobs go to native workers, okay? This is a win-win, okay? So if you want jobs, you want immigrants because you want investment. That's what you need to understand, okay? Now that's just, again, one of those 5 things, right? The investment piece of that circle I just showed you. Let me tell you one more story that illustrates one more thing, and then I'll probably have to finish at that point. Now, I don't know how many of you in this audience like salsa, that is salsa, the musical genre. Okay. I was born in Latin America. And so when I moved to the US, most of my friends assumed that I was a good salsa dancer. I am not. But they made that assumption because they thought that salsa was created in Latin America, and so did I. And so I was always a little bit ashamed that I'm not a good salsa dancer despite being from Latin America. But a few years ago, I learned something that completely changed my view on this and helped me understand something about immigration and business and the economy that is really fundamental. As it turns out, salsa was created in Brooklyn, New York. Salsa is a US invention, okay? It's a made in the USA musical genre. And the story goes that a bunch of musicians from different countries in Latin America settled in Queens, They started jamming and interacting with local musicians, local New Yorkers, Jewish Americans, Italian Americans, and they started mixing sounds. And out of this, and this is we're talking about in the late 50s, early 60s, arose this new musical genre that didn't exist before. And as it turns out, even as catchy as salsa music was, there wasn't a record label willing to record this new kind of music. So in 1964, a Dominican immigrant named Johnny Pacheco and an American-Italian lawyer partnered to start a company called Fania Records. Fania recorded the very first salsa album in 1964, and as they say, the rest is history. Salsa went viral. Salsa musicians started filling stadiums all over the U.S. and the world. Fania started signing, legendary salsa artists like Celia Cruz and others that you might have heard of. And out of this came not just a really important cultural innovation, but think of the business implications of this. Think of the business implications of new talent that comes, remixes with native talent, something new, some new innovation, in this case, a product and cultural innovation comes out of this. This results in the founding of a business. This is the entrepreneurship of immigrants, a business that creates jobs, a business that is paying taxes, a whole ecosystem around a whole new industry. Because think of the concert halls, think of all the people involved, and all the jobs and other benefits that arose from the interaction of natives and immigrants. Okay. This is a story of innovation. It's a story of talent. It's a story of consumption. It's a story of taxes. It's a story of basically all the five things that I mentioned that happen because of the win-wins that immigrants create. Okay. Now, you may or may not care about music, and you might think, well, this is kind of a silly little anecdote. Let's talk about something that you might care about a lot more. Let's talk about patents. Let's talk about the innovation engine of the United States. Okay. There's a study that came out a couple years ago that shows that immigrants are responsible for 36% of all patents in the US. Now, what's impressive about that number is that immigrants are only 16% of inventors. So what 16%, but they're accountable for more than double their representation in terms of patents. They punch way above their weight. Okay. Now that number can be broken down into two quantities. 23%, which is that immigrants are direct inventors, the inventors of record on 23% of patents. But the other 13% that gets us to 36% is that by interacting with foreign-born inventors, native US-born inventors become more inventive and creative. Why? Because they're exposed to new ideas, they're exposed to new scientific networks, they're exposed to new sources of funding for their ideas. This is the story of salsa all over again, but in the context of patents that produce technologies that make our lives better and richer and more comfortable, that result in countless businesses that create countless jobs that pay countless taxes. So you see all those five elements interacting with each other all over again. Okay. So I barely scratched the surface, but this is why immigrants are net job creators. Okay. If we put some numbers to these five, I've already told you some of them. Immigrants 80% more likely to start businesses, 36% of all patents, $1.2 trillion in consumption power, a net present value contribution to taxes of $260,000 after accounting for any public services they use. And despite being only 18% of our labor force, filling way more than 18% of jobs in critical sectors from STEM, AI, to household services, to construction, to manufacturing, to nursing, to all kinds of things that are vital for us. So when we talk about what we want with immigration, it's not about immigrants. The question is, do we want investment, taxes, consumption, innovation, talent, and jobs? That's the question. And if you want those things in your community and your country, you need an immigration system that functions and that allows us to have the people that we need. That's what's at stake here. So those are my overall framing comments, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation. Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you, Ziki, for that wonderful analysis. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Kim. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Genova Burns. I've been asked by the coalition to moderate today's panel. I'd like to begin by introducing our four distinguished members of the panel. Each one brings a unique perspective to bear on this topic. We have asked each panel member to begin by giving us a short summary of what they have learned on this topic and how it might influence future policy development. Before we begin, let me introduce each member of the panel. I'll do so in alphabetical order. We are here today with Megan Chambers, our first panelist. She is the president of the New Jersey State Council of the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU. Her office brings together all SEIU affiliates in New Jersey struggling to improve the lives of New Jersey's working families. Megan is also co-manager of the Laundry, Distribution, and Food Service Joint Board, a labor union of 8,000 workers headquartered in Newark. Our second panelist is Ramya Devan. She is the professor of economics and global studies at Stockton University. Professor Devan is an immigrant herself from India, and she has published multiple studies on the integration of immigrants and refugees into host economies and the racial context of immigration policies in the United States. Our third panelist is Lori Jensen. She is the executive director of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association and of the New Jersey Green Industry Council. Lori is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition. Our fourth panelist is Michelle Sirkirka. She is the president and CEO of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, the NJBIA. Michelle leads one of the largest and most influential business associations in the United States. The New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition is proud of its partnership with the NJBIA to organize programs such as this one through the Garden State Immigration Policy Institute. We have asked each of the four panelists to share opening remarks for approximately 5 minutes, after which we will have a more broader discussion. So we will go in alphabetical order. So if I may, Megan, can you please start and provide us with your 5-minute commentary?
Hi, good morning. Very glad to be here with folks. So that was a great presentation by Professor Hernandez. I discovered that I'm speaking about immigrants as workers, and now I can say I'm speaking about that component of the immigrant community and experience, because as Professor Hernandez says, there are other components. But with 25 years in the labor movement in New Jersey and other parts of this country, working with frontline workers, essential workers, service workers, blue-collar workers, both US-born and immigrants, I want to speak to the question directly of, do immigrants displace US workers? And that is not at all what we see from our seat in the labor movement representing these folks. When you look around you, just take New Jersey. Look at the jobs that immigrant workers are, where they make up a large proportion of the workforce. And I'm going to name a few that I'm familiar with, that most of us will be familiar with: the healthcare sector, nursing homes, hospitals. At every level, immigrant workers make up a large proportion of folks cleaning the building, changing the sheets, changing the bedpans, providing patient care. And I know there are also many immigrant doctors and nurses and higher skilled folks, but I'm talking about frontline jobs that these institutions cannot function without these workers. A large proportion of immigrants do those jobs. Look at the warehouse and distribution center. For anyone who doesn't know it, this has been a booming sector in New Jersey's economy for decades, growing and growing, doubling and doubling again in size. And a large proportion of the workers in these warehouses and distribution centers are immigrant workers. A large proportion of workers who work in kitchens and in landscaping and in harvesting are immigrant workers. And these folks are working in these sectors not because they're displacing US workers, but in our experience, Many US workers choose other jobs and they do not prefer to take those jobs. And we can understand why that is. These are really demanding jobs, they're physical jobs. When there was a COVID-19 pandemic and it was recognized all over this country that it was not safe to leave your home, these are jobs where you had to leave your home every day and go to work, because those are the kinds of demanding jobs that these are and the kinds of crucial jobs that these are. Many US born workers choose other jobs because they are higher status. They may be higher pay. They may have better benefits. They may have better career ladders. They may have better retirement prospects for retirement security. And it's a great thing for US born workers to have that array of choices. But immigrant workers are the jobs that these immigrant workers are doing are crucial to the well-being of all of us and to our economy as well. And I just want to mention, think for a minute, if immigrant workers in New Jersey disappeared somehow tomorrow, it would be a catastrophe in this state. Hospitals would not be safe for anyone to use. Nursing home patients would not be cared for. People who rely on nursing homes, on home attendants, on childcare workers to care for their children and elderly folks in their family or sick folks in their family would have to leave their jobs to go care for those folks. So it's completely not the case that immigrants are displacing US workers. And I just want to say, from an organized labor perspective, that immigrant workers provide incredibly valuable work, that they deserve all of our respect, all of our appreciation. And if we're thinking about what will raise the bar for working people in this country, stronger protection of their labor rights makes it possible for all workers to organize and fight effectively to improve their working conditions. I've seen workers do that many times. And if we're talking about policies that would help workers do that, stronger protections for the rights of immigrant workers and stronger protections for the organizing rights of all workers would really put us all forward on job quality. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next panelist is Professor Devan.
Thank you all. Thank you to NJBIA and the keynote speaker and my fellow panelists for this much needed conversation so we can continue to persuade people to look at actual data and address the many misconceptions about immigrants in the economy. I'm going to reiterate some of what the previous speaker said, but I think I have been invited to give an overview of the contribution of immigrant workers specifically in New Jersey. While some of my other panelists might speak about specific sectors, I want to summarize the overall impact, and it's fairly simple to do without getting into too much data or overloading you with too many numbers. Immigrant workers are indispensable to the New Jersey economy. While nationally, foreign-born workers constitute 18% of the labor force, in New Jersey, immigrant workers account for a much higher 29% of the labor force. In some northern counties like Middlesex, Bergen, and Hudson County, that percent is closer to or higher than 40%. In fact, Bergen and Middlesex counties, which have an over 40% are immigrant foreign-born workers, are also the two top contributors to the overall output of the state. Similar to national trends, labor force participation rates among foreign-born workers are also higher when compared to US-born workers in New Jersey. They're also in a wide range of occupations. We can look at some of the top occupations that recur in most New Jersey counties for foreign-born workers, and there are a diversity of occupations, primarily registered nurses, software developers, housekeeping service providers, drivers, and physicians. We track all of this with county-level information, with easy-to-access infographics, if you're interested, at the Hughes Center for Public Policy at Stockton University. So the bottom line really is that the New Jersey economy relies greatly on immigrant workers, as my previous panelists already mentioned. The New Jersey economy would not survive if these immigrant workers went away suddenly. So the bottom line is that without immigration, we would just not have the diversified strengths of and dynamism of the New Jersey economy, without which, and we would also have shortages in critical services like healthcare, education, and housekeeping, all of which supports all workers and their ability to participate in the labor market. So we're asking the specific question of how does immigration impact US-born workers? Well, US-born workers benefit greatly from the diversified support that their immigrant counterparts offer them. I now want to turn away from the numbers and perhaps speak from my own experience, give you a little bit of my own immigrant journey to illustrate some other misconceptions. I came to Stockton University on an H-1B visa, the visa for high-skilled immigrants. Now, to transition from H-1B to permanent residency, which is the pathway to citizenship, it took me 7 long, precarious years, during which time I had no mobility of employment or certainty about when the process would end. This is a common predicament for H-1B workers. In fact, I was one of the lucky ones, since my PhD from an American institution and a position in a university put me ahead in the H-1 gridlock. In most cases today, many H-1B workers face 15 to 20-year wait times, mired as they are in an archaic quota system that leaves lives in limbo with limited job mobility and with limited to little negotiating or bargaining ability to face their employers. It is these limitations that depress wages. Let's consider the counterfactual, as Megan already did. If there were no more H-1B workers or immigrant workers in the United States, suddenly, would US-born workers see a sudden expansion of job opportunities and wages? Unlikely, since the economy depends so much on the labor of these workers. But improving the system with a clearer pathway, giving more protection to H-1B workers, would help bring up wages. After all, there's consistent evidence in the economic literature that improving worker protections, as Megan already mentioned, and the bargaining abilities of workers improves wages for all. The same applies to low-skilled immigrant workers who fill critical shortages that are only bound to expand given the aging demographic profile in New Jersey and in the US in general. If there were clearer pathways to documentation, it would help them get better representation and push for higher wages for all. Talk of mass deportations and cutting off all low-skilled immigrants only pushes them more into the margins, with the potential to cause declining wages for all. It is often the case that raising questions about immigration workers is then used as a distraction instead of addressing some long-term critical challenges in our economic system, like the long-term decline in union representation, which has depressed wages, or the lack of affordable housing, affordable supply of housing, none of which will be fixed if we put a stop to immigration. Instead, if we view immigrant workers as an opportunity to provide critical support to the US economy, we could then begin to think and address the many logistical details that indeed need to be fixed in the immigration system, and that would benefit us all. So I'll stop here, and hopefully we can get more into some of these details in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Our next panelist is Lori Jensen.
Good morning, everybody. So the New Jersey Nursery Landscape Association represents thousands of businesses in New Jersey encompassing the nursery, greenhouse grower, landscape, and garden center industries. Just a little bit about what that means. New Jersey's nursery and floriculture crop industry contributes to New Jersey's, it is continuing to be the New Jersey's leading agricultural sector and is valued at $500 million. Nursery production accounts for over 40% of New Jersey's ag output, and the green industry in New Jersey is estimated to contribute almost $4 billion to the state's economy. And according to a 2019 Rutgers economic impact study, turfgrass economic impact study, the total impact of New Jersey's home lawn maintenance was estimated to be $2.8 billion. New Jersey's turfgrass service providers generated an estimated $127.3 million in state tax revenue in 2019. So that economic impact study also asked companies that responded to the survey to provide the factors that affected their success. So challenges were grouped into three categories: regulatory, management, and turf grass related. Under the management category, no surprise, labor availability was the most commonly cited problem. So our member businesses rely heavily on seasonal labor, and much of that workforce is migratory or from an immigrant background. Our industry is labor intensive, like Megan had said earlier, and the availability of locally sourced labor, it just doesn't exist, at least not enough to cover the needs of our industry. And trust me, we've tried. We have apprenticeship programs, we do job fairs, we have career boards. We participate in a lot of Future Farmers of America, FFA events for local high schools to try to get people to encourage them to enter this industry. So basically, immigration plays a crucial role in supporting New Jersey's nursery and landscape businesses while positively influencing U.S. workers and the broader economy. So like Professor Hernandez said, it is a business issue. So some of the things that are positively impact is immigrants bring valuable experience in agriculture, landscaping, horticulture, which enhances the productivity and service quality. In many cases, there's economic growth for those businesses. They can sustain their operations with a steady labor force provided by those immigrants. Businesses can avoid operational disruptions and expand their services, contributing to local and state economic growth. In a lot of cases, those immigrants then will actually start their own businesses. So it's a great entry for them. So the positive effects that this work has on U.S. workers. Job creation. So immigrant labor allows businesses to grow, leading to increased demand for higher skilled and managerial positions that are often filled by U.S. workers. For example, as a business expands, roles such as supervisors, managers, and sales staff are created. Also, the support industries. The growth of the nursery and landscape businesses drives demand for related industries such as equipment manufacturing, transportation, retail, and indirectly creates more jobs for American workers. So the contributions to local economies that immigrants provide, consumer spending, right? Immigrant workers contribute to the local economy by spending their earnings on housing, groceries, and other goods and services. And tax contributions. Immigrant workers pay taxes, including payroll and sales tax, which support public services such as schools and infrastructure. So basically, all of that tells you that immigration is an essential factor in the success of New Jersey's nursery and landscape businesses. Immigrants provide a reliable workforce that allows these businesses to grow, innovate, and remain competitive. This in turn benefits U.S. workers by creating jobs, boosting local economies, and ensuring the sustainability of a vital industry. Supporting immigrant labor is not only beneficial for the nursery and landscape sector, but also strengthens the broader economic system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last panelist, Michelle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I am unmuted. Okay, I want to make sure. I just got a pop-up that said unmute yourself. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Look, the economic case has been made by all the speakers this morning. And I don't want to be repetitive, but I may take us up a couple notches with a little bit more data. First of all, NJBIA, we advocate tirelessly for an affordable and regionally competitive business climate here in the state of New Jersey for all the businesses all across the state. These businesses are our job creators. And without job creators creating new jobs each and every day, our economy cannot flourish and cannot grow. And growth is an important factor here. Staying stagnant is not something that is beneficial, nor is seeing a decline in growth or in jobs. So, these numbers are so important. What we've heard today about how it impacts specific industries. What I think is amazing, I heard a stat last week that absolutely totally blew my mind. From 2015 to 2024, this is on the national scale, foreign-born civilian workforce has grown from 26 million to 33 million. And just last year alone, 800,000 foreign-born civilian people entered the workforce. Now, what I understood when I heard these numbers and what was echoed was, We would have been in a recession last year, but for the foreign-born civilian workforce that was here in the United States. If you all recall, we were on and off again. Are we hitting a recession? Are we going to be in a recession or not? And everybody kept saying, well, as long as unemployment stays low, we're going to be okay. Well, what caused unemployment to stay low was the foreign-born civilian workforce, and we need to be extremely conscious of that. Again, clearly the economic impact. In New Jersey, some examples, 5,000 companies sponsor H-1B visas here in the state of New Jersey. And that was just in 2024, this past year, 5,000 companies. But an example of the range, Cognizant Technology, 1,000 sponsored H-1B visa workers there. 1,000 of their workforce. Ernst & Young, one of the top 4 accounting firms in the nation here in New Jersey, 800 H-1B visa workers. It gives you an idea again of the span of these workers. We know that the span goes from the very highly educated STEM, people in research development, bio, pharma, manufacturing, etc., down to what you heard today, the service workers, and everyone in between. Where do some of these work gaps come from? And it's very interesting if we talk about the STEM population for a moment. We might not realize that here in the United States, we only graduate about 20% of our graduating population into STEM jobs as of today. Now, there's been an incredible effort over the last decade to continue to move people into STEM. You all see that, the programs, right? So that number should continue to grow. But let's compare that graduating population in China. 40% graduate into STEM jobs, and in India, 34% graduate into STEM jobs. That explains to you again, when you see the folks who are filling these positions, these STEM positions all across New Jersey and the nation, oftentimes you see people coming from those countries where they have capacity that we don't have here. One of the big challenges, of course, is the caps that we have on the H-1B visa program today. Those caps are way too low for what our needs are. And frankly, there is an over request. In 2024 alone, there was a 140% increase in requests for H-1B visas from American companies. There were 758,000 requests, and they can't be filled with the caps that we have. There are alternate ways aside from H-1B visa that have been discussed. There's the O-1 visa, which is someone with the extraordinary ability in a very specialized, unique space. Or if someone works with an international company, there's an opportunity for them to come in a different way as well. And then in academia, there are no caps for particular folks who could come through an academic route, but there's been huge growth here as well. From 2020 through 2023 in academia, the foreign-born population has risen from 15,000 to 38,000. So these are really extraordinary numbers. And when you stop and think about that statement that but for the foreign-born worker here in the United States, we would have had a recession, we should stop and think about the big economic impact. So what do we understand to finish up from the national perspective as we have a new administration coming in and Trump has, spoken very boldly about having immigration policies in place? I can tell you that the people who are chirping in his ear in DC right now are explaining these economic impacts with hard data. What we understand, and what we know is that soon-to-be President Trump, he loves people. You saw him during the campaign out with the union, right, out at manufacturing facilities, and he says, I'm here for the workers. He now needs to be well-educated to understand who those workers represent, and the idea is to take a scalpel to whatever policy he has. And ensure that it doesn't impact the workers that we have here today that are economically contributing to our state economy as well as our national economy. And I know those are the types of discussions taking place. So with that, I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are pleased now to bring Professor Hernandez back for a follow-up discussion. I would like to give him the opportunity to comment on any of the remarks made by the panelists.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really honored to, share the stage with each of the 4 panelists, and thanks for your remarks. There's really, you haven't said anything that I disagree with. I think all the comments here are very much on point. So rather than sort of at least, debate or push back, because I don't have any pushbacks at this point, let me perhaps just add a few things or perhaps highlight a few of the points that the panelists made. And let me start with this big one. If the case is so positive, right? We all spoke quite glowingly, I think, overall on how much we fundamentally depend on immigrants and immigrant workers. then what is the problem? What is all this debate about? And I think the elephant in the room, of course, is that someone who's skeptical about what we're talking about today would say, yeah, fine, but what about illegal immigration, right? That's the issue. Or what about the chaos on the border? So perhaps let me just comment on that just a little bit. I think what we need to understand is that these economic contributions that immigrants make don't depend very much on the legal status of immigrants. That is, even undocumented immigrants who are working in many jobs that we know that they do bring a lot of these benefits that we talked about. Now, I'm the first one to say that it would be way better. In fact, we should not have such a large undocumented population in this country. There are, depending on the estimates, somewhere between 12 to 14, probably in my opinion, the number is somewhere between 12 and 13 million undocumented immigrants. Okay. But I think we need to understand why. That is, why do we have such a large undocumented immigrant population, and what would happen if we kick them out? If we kick them out, essentially we would lose the 5 things that I mentioned, right? We would lose all these benefits because many of these undocumented immigrants are filling essential jobs. But why do we have so many of them? And this is where I think we need to understand that the system is the biggest problem. That is, it's a problem of our own creation. Okay. And I'll give you a few examples that show just how nonsensical and outdated the system is. Keep in mind that we have not changed the number or types of visas that we offer since the year 1990. That's 35 years. Okay. How different is the world? How different is our economy, right, than it was 35 years ago, right? We didn't even have the internet in 1990, right? We had an immigration system that was not attuned to the age in which we live. We had a very different demographic profile. Our birth rates were above replacement. As of yesterday, we had a report come out showing that our birth rate has gone down to like 1.6, 1.7, which is really, really low. Okay. And so the point is that we haven't reformed the system in 35 years. And here are some examples of how outdated it is. We give 1 million green cards per year in this country legally. That's the size of our legal system, plus a few 100,000 temporary work visas, most of which are H-1B visas. Okay. Now, out of the 1 million green cards that we give, only 140,000 are employer-sponsored green cards. Okay. My state of Pennsylvania by itself could use all 140,000 of those every single year. Do you know how many green cards we give for farm workers? 0. They don't exist. How many green cards are available for carpenters? 0. How many green cards are available for plumbers? 0. Okay? We simply don't have a path. There is no line for people who bring many of the skills and do many of the things that we're talking about in this panel. Okay, so if we need those people, but there is no legal path for them to come, and there's a demand for them, how does that demand get filled? Unfortunately, it gets filled through irregular or illegal immigration. Now, that's not right. That's not the right way that we should do it, but that's why it's happening. And so we have a bit of a hypocritical relationship with undocumented immigrants because we need them, we benefit from them, we like what they do, but then we don't change the system. And so my hope is that we can actually change the system to bring it up to reality. But what needs to be really clear is that the system needs to increase the number of immigrants, increase the number of visas, allow many of the people who are here to stay to continue to get these benefits and not fall into a recession, rather than be a reform that is restrictive and decreases the number and variety of visas that we have. Unfortunately, that seems to be on the horizon now. As Michelle said, I do hope that the people who are whispering in Donald Trump's ears, that he listens to them. But that is not what the administration did in its previous iteration. It actually reduced both legal and undocumented immigration. But I think, anyway, I wanted to address the elephant in the room because I'm sure that's an issue on many people's minds. All right, I think my 5 minutes might be more than up. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So I would like to open this discussion to the entire panel. Would any member of the panel like to comment on what any of their colleagues have said previously? No? Okay. So I actually had a question to Lori. Lori, you mentioned about the immigrant workforce improving the working conditions in general and labor activity. I was curious, number-wise, do you know if the immigrant community is more involved in labor, organized labor and stuff like that, and actually work to improve, like they're more vocal in improving working conditions?
Jessica, that's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure. I know that collaboratively between the businesses that employ them and the workers themselves, there's a great relationship. In this industry, we recognize that our businesses are reliant on the labor. And so it's not just that they're workers, they're part of the family in a lot of these cases, particularly some of the agricultural individuals that come over through the H2A program, H2A, yeah, that they come back every year to the same place. They literally are part of the family. So I think there's a lot of protections that are provided to them through the law if they're coming through some of the visa programs, housing, there's a lot of protections that are in place already. So I believe that between the fact that they're part of the family, we recognize the need for them and we appreciate all that they do and the protections that are provided through the visa programs. I think we're in pretty good shape that way. Again, that doesn't even start to talk about the reforms that Professor Hernandez mentioned that they need to be changed. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Megan.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add that I think you raise a good question that about workers organizing and again, decades of experience, just not just me, but many of my colleagues across the country. It's immigrant workers do organize. They are at least as likely to organize as US born workers, to want to organize and to be willing to organize. The real obstacles that immigrants and US born workers face in organizing is that US labor law makes it very hard for workers to organize. And this is extensively documented. And there are certainly bills in Congress that have been introduced, but not passed, that would rectify that. But yes, absolutely, immigrant workers do organize in many, many sectors and are willing and able, willing to do that. But allowing people who've been here a long time who remain undocumented to normalize their status would of course help, because anybody who is in that situation is going to be much more easily subjected to exploitation and intimidation. But immigrant workers absolutely do organize with unions. Yes.
I know that so Michelle talked about the H-1B visa, which is given to college-educated graduates. Does anyone have a comment on the H-1B program? Because I know that it has been a recent hot topic in the past couple of weeks with the incoming administration.
Sure, I can jump in as a former H-1B person myself. H-1B is really reviled without having the full information. I think, as everyone has mentioned, the problem is that there is a demand for high-skilled workers, but H-1B is really mired in a really intricate and archaic quota system where countries that supply us with a lot of the high-skilled immigrants, the top countries, are overflowing their quotas, and so they have a great deal of a wait list that people are mired in. And I think Michelle already talked about the discrepancy between the number of applicants for H-1B and the number of available visa quota. I also want to add that H-1B by definition is a very temporary visa status. So you get the first 3 years and then you get an extension, I believe. So you have a finite time limit. But that puts these workers under tremendous pressure because they are beholden to that one employer. They have very little mobility. And the next stage in the transition, which is moving on to a permanent residency or then moving on to citizenship, is once again mired in a really intense quota system, which leads to more than 10, 20-year wait period. And what is really coming up now is that a lot of the H-1B workers, because they have such little predictability about how to plan their lives, whether to buy a home, whether their children will go on to school or colleges, a lot of them look to move elsewhere to other countries just because of this intense wait period. So while we hear a lot about H-1B in the negative context, we also have to understand that making all the H-1B disappear will substantially reduce the STEM contributions that they're making to the economy. But on the other hand, that's already happening just because the H-1B system makes it so hard for them to continue to live in this country.
Yeah, perhaps to add just two cents on that, just really quick. Canada, I think it was a couple of years ago, made available 10,000 slots for people who were having H-1B problems in the United States. Okay, and it was a deliberate move to poach talent, and those 10,000 slots were applied for within 2 hours, right? My colleague Britta Glennon has a study showing that when companies can't hire H-1B workers in the US, they don't hire more in the US because there are no substitute workers. It's not that they exist. They hire those people in India, China, and Canada. And also there's research showing that when foreign workers cannot transition from an H-1B to permanent residence, we miss out on a ton of startups and technologies that they bring, right? Because they want to. The H-1B doesn't allow them to start a business. They want to, but if they're in a 20-year line, or in the case of certain Indians, they have to wait 195 years. Just think about that, 195-year wait. They can't do everything that they want. So the problem with the restrictions is not just that they suffer, it's really that we suffer, right? It's an own goal. It's a terrible own goal.
So I think our takeaway is that for H-1B visas, high-skilled laborers, it's the narrative that there's a displacement of American workers is untrue. Right?
Yeah, and there is empirical evidence on that. It's not just like anecdotal. There are peer-reviewed hardcore studies that show that either these workers do not displace native workers, and actually some studies show that for every H-1B worker, companies hire more than one additional worker. So they are job creators, they're job multipliers, right? But at worst, they don't take away jobs, right? And at best, they create jobs.
Now, on the other side, I guess for the unskilled laborers, it would be true based on our discussion today that we don't have enough American workers to fill those jobs, right? So I actually have an interesting data here. It says that Focus NJ recently reported that the unemployment rate in New Jersey was 4.7%, which is the 6th highest in the nation. So New Jersey is doing pretty well. The rate was much higher in New Jersey for unemployment for those with a high school diploma at 6%, while college graduates had a much lower rate of 3%. One of the higher ones was among construction professionals at 9.2%. So this is open to the panel in general, but to what extent should we take unemployment rates into consideration when trying to determine desirable levels of immigration? Anyone?
I think it should be. And some of the things we talked about earlier, speak to that. There's not enough US born population to fill the demand for the jobs across the board, be it the frontline entry, positions or the highly skilled positions. The data is out there and the evidence is pretty clear when you see the over demand. And I hear every day, particularly manufacturing, skilled trades, et cetera, there's not a pool to draw from. So again, while we continue to upskill and grow STEM jobs, here in New Jersey, we have strategies to do that. But the reality is the demographic and the population is not going to keep up with it. I mean, we're going into a reverse demographic phase in our history. And so what are we going to do when we don't have birth population, filling jobs? And on the other side, it is true that there's just jobs that, Americans don't do, that culturally, foreign-born individuals by nature do. So we need to just grasp those realities and do what we can to continue to make sure that we can fill these positions. And what'll tell the call is once if there's some big action, and we can't, and all of a sudden unemployment is going to go like sky high. People are going to say, why is unemployment going sky high? Because we can't fill these positions. It's not because people are laying off people. It's because we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that we have. Then maybe that will help to speak to the fact that we need to open up these numbers. And to the professor's point, they are extremely outdated. I just want to say one more thing while I just have the mic, is the J-1 visa program also significantly important to New Jersey, our tourism season. I could tell you the first year post-COVID, the first year of COVID, obviously we didn't have a tourism season. The second year when we couldn't get the J-1 visa program running fast enough, our tourism season died on a vine. We don't have those young youth workers here. And internationally, J-1 visa is work study program, right? Students want the experience and the opportunity. They come here for a limited amount of time, they work, and then they can travel and they can explore and they can think about, their future opportunities. And if they want to take some other action, to come back and work in the future in another manner.
Sure. So I guess if the narrative, sorry, Professor.
Yeah, no, that's really well said by Michelle. The only thing I wanted to add, I think that the example of construction you gave is a really good one, because you say, well, someone could look at that number and say, well, wait, construction workers have a high rate of unemployment in New Jersey, and immigrants do a lot of construction work. Aren't they taking the jobs away from the native-born construction workers? And it's not, because you have to pit it against the other fact that we are in a massive housing shortage. So how do you jive high unemployment and construction with the housing shortage? It's actually because there aren't enough foreign-born workers to keep construction firms open. Here's a very specific example. If you own a construction business, you need a certain minimum number of employees to keep that business going. You want to bid on a job to build a house or build a building, you need to have all the roofers, all the flooring installers, all the drywall installers, all the carpenters, right? All the people doing all the skills to bid on that job. But if there's a shortage of workers to do, say, roofing and drywall installation, you can't bid on that job, which means that the other workers that are available, native born, are losing their jobs. They're unemployed because there aren't enough workers to bid on the entire job. Does that make sense? And so this is why natives and immigrants complement each other. In fact, one way to think about unskilled immigrants is that they are job preservers for native workers, because they allow things like that to happen, right? A construction firm to bid on the job, a landscaping company to complete a job, a factory to remain open instead of closing a line or closing a shift.
But I think to wrap up, so I think based on our discussion, we know that the displacement of American workers is not true. Like, immigrants are not displacing American workers generally, right? So I think the issue is messaging, right? Because we hear the word displacement of American workers in the media, and we're just scared. In general, Americans are scared that jobs are being lost to immigrants. Does anyone have any ideas about how we can change this messaging?
Well,
My hand is up. Can you see my hand?
Oh,
Not
Uh,
yet. Hang on a minute, Patricia.
sorry, Ramya, if you could speak on that.
Sure. I think I want to combine a little bit with the construction worker theme as well as the messaging. The clear message is that, we are looking at an aging and also declining demographic. In New Jersey itself, we have a population that's 18% over 65 years old. In the next 10 years, that percent is going to go up to 20% over 65. That is going to place an incredible stress on the economy when we have so many workers, so many many people over the age of the traditional working age. And if you look at long-term predictions from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we also know that there is going to be a 2% decline in US labor force over the next 20 years. I mean, these are real numbers. So we want to think of an economic pie that's constantly growing. We cannot make a pie constantly grow if we are looking at 2% declines in labor force participation. So that is the messaging that has to be out there, that we have an aging and declining population, and the only way to keep the economic pie diversified and growing is to continue to depend on migrant workers for our dynamism. When we also think more specifically about industries like construction, we know that unemployment waves come and go, right? But immigrants, when they're coming in, we also have to understand that they're whole people, right? They may be construction workers whose spouses are nurses and providing housekeeping services. So we are thinking about families and whole people migrating. We cannot be looking at everyday changes in unemployment rates to decide which whole person will come into the country. That's not a way to construct a smart policy that is trying to mitigate against real declines in overall demographic trends in the US. So we have to keep in mind not to dice these particular unemployment numbers too closely. We might miss out on the bigger ship, so to speak, of all the benefits that they bring in as the whole person and families.
Sure. So now I have to hand this discussion off to Catherine Kish. She is the Executive Director of the Einstein's Alley.
Okay, hi, thank you. Just so you all know, Einstein's Alley is one of the very proud founding members of this organization, and we've had such a good discussion today so far. There's a kind of an unusual question here that I think is worth tackling. From Marcia Steinberg, she says, business gets the benefits from hiring immigrants, but local communities in the short run experience disruption in health services, education, and other services. Is there a responsibility for a business in this situation? We know that people pay taxes, immigrants pay taxes, but the question is do local communities get the benefit? Anyone want to take that? Okay, 10-foot pole. No one
Megan
wants
has her
to.
hand up, I think.
Patricia, did you want to take that, Dr. Fernandez-Kelly?
Well, thank you. I want to thank all of you for participating in this event. Thank you, Zeke. A pleasure seeing you again. And thank you, Catherine and Ryan, for organizing this. I'm impressed by how well documented all of you are. And I'm particularly impressed that you're business people. I think the question raised by Marcia is perfectly legitimate, because not in all one of the reasons why we have a so-called border crisis is because the number of immigrants arriving is not by general standards. If you zoom out of the situation, it's not that huge of a number. But when they all arrive at the same point, there are, in fact, as Marcia is saying, local disruptions. That's one of the reasons why I think it is very important that we think out of the box in terms of reception mechanisms and allocation mechanisms. Whether you're an asylum seeker or whether you are a kind of like garden variety immigrant, sorry for that expression, although I like it, you are looking for opportunity, you're looking for comfort, you believe in the institutions of this great country, and you will find jobs, as all of you have demonstrated. So why in heck have people not considered having the kinds of procedural tools in order to receive immigrants and then to allocate them to places where their labor is needed? And I think that we can play an important role in trying to develop those kinds of reception mechanisms. That would be my challenge to you and my response to Marcia. because as all of you have described, on the whole, immigration is not only good, but absolutely necessary to this country. And although I appreciate every single word that you said, I'll add another element. When we talk about the crisis in so-called entitlement programs, which of course I do not believe there is such a crisis, but certainly without immigrants and young people to actually supply the revenue to sustain those programs, we're also in trouble. So it's not just an namby-pamby kind of wishful thinking about our immigrant identity. It's that, as Zeke has correctly pointed out, from a practical business point of view and from the point of view of nation building, we really do need immigrants. So Marcia, I'd love to work with you. And one last thing, and that which I included in the chat box. I love what you are doing and I love this conversation, but right now my greatest concern is about the deportation campaigns. And I do wonder whether all of us have some imagination in order to develop ways in which we can protect some of our most vulnerable undocumented Americans. I'm speaking especially about people who have been in this country for a long time and are still undocumented because of the way in which the system is broken. So I like to call them undocumented Americans because they are. And by the way, I have one very much in my care, a dreamer who is about to complete law school and who is not sure as to whether he's going to even be able to practice because he depends on DACA. So I think that beyond analysis, which I think is, and the messaging problem, which is very real, we need to look at ways in which we can, sensibly protect communities from large inflows of immigrants at any particular point. And second, we need to find ways to organize in order to protect immigrants at risk of deportation.
Thank you, Patricia. Ramya, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I want to particularly address this discussion about the stress on communities and entitlement programs. One of the big misconceptions is that the immigrants, particularly when they come in the sort of large scale waves that has been happening recently, is that they come here to become dependent on entitlement programs. That is furthest from the truth. They're coming here to find the jobs. But the problem is that there is such a backlog of employment authorization that they are then in this bind where they want to work, they're willing to work, but they don't have the employment authorization, and which is what makes them dependent on the social services. So really what is required is to clear that tremendous backlog of employment authorization, and local officials have been speaking about it. I think the New York mayor and even the New York governor had spoken about perhaps trying to give employment authorization at the state level, but because the backlog is tremendous at the federal level now, and immigration is a federal level law, but relying on them to provide these authorizations when we need the workers, they want to work, but they are sort of stuck here in this limbo. That is what is creating the stress on the social services and the entitlement programs. So we really have to, again, think about, are we asking the right questions about where the problem is? The problem is not with immigrants. The problem is with the system that we are bringing them into, because we do have a demand for their services, but then we are sort of making them stuck in that no-win situation.
That's a very, very good explanation. Thank you, Ramya. Megan, did you have a question or a comment? We need you to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. So I know this is just building on what Ramya said. I just want to flag and build on what Zeke Hernandez said at the outset about the policy situation, because at the end of the day, we are in a problem of our own making in this country, where for anyone who doesn't know it, there hasn't been a path to normalization since the Reagan administration, 1986, where the federal government addressed the issue of long-term workers who didn't have proper documentation and allowed people to normalize based on their long history of working in this country. So 1986, almost 40 years ago, you know, as we haven't had a policy in this country that provides a path for normalization for folks who are not fully documented and work and live and are our neighbors. So I would say that you can't really differentiate between immigrants in the community because we live in communities where lots of folks are immigrants with all kinds of statuses. And we really are in this country, if we could address the policy problem, we wouldn't have these other problems. There simply needs to be a path for earned citizenship for people who work and contribute to the country. Otherwise, we call them illegal and we want to run, you know, there are those who will call them illegal and say they need to be deported, which is nonsensical. But it can be very confusing for people who are unaware, and most people in this country are not aware that there is no path to normalization and that that's been the case for 39 years and that that is the federal government's fault. And it really is a fundamental flaw.
Okay, thank you. You know, there's a comment about unions and union workers and the problem, but the heart of that comment I think is interesting, which is we are discouraging our sons from the unions. And I think one of the things that we see as we look at education in this country is that we're also discouraging our sons from vocational professions. And we are just beginning to catch up with this now, where we are starting to say to young people and starting to say to their parents that not everyone needs a 4-year college immediately out of high school. There is really room for well-trained vocational jobs and employment, and it's a real need. And I think some of that will ameliorate some of the problems with this feeling that unions are not necessarily representing young people properly. So I hope we can do more of that kind of thing. We have in this very county, we have a wonderful vocational school that's doing marvelous training and a community college that's doing advanced manufacturing. So there are lots of opportunities that I think will lead at some point to union membership if young people are interested. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I'm sorry we kind of have to close it down. Is there anyone else who has a burning comment? We know that we need to do better jobs of messaging, that's for sure. That was one of our comments. I don't see, here we go. Okay. Nora Parime seems to have some good comments on young people and unions. You might want to take a look at the chat. But in the meantime, I'm afraid I have to close us down because time is running out. So on behalf of the Board of Trustees and members of the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition, I'd really like to thank all of today's speakers. You were all terrific for your valuable comments and your willingness to grapple with such an important and challenging topic. With so much misinformation out there, many put immigration on the sidelines, not recognizing its critical importance in numerous industries and the vital role it has played in stimulating the growth of the American economy. We also, as Professor Hernandez and others have said, we also suffer from an antiquated immigration system that's been in place for 35 to 50 years and is no longer relevant to the needs of our modern economy. So we hope, we know that responsible leaders in both parties are eager to advance immigration policies that are evidence-based and that will benefit the American people and the American workforce that we've discussed today. Really important that our political leaders take a lead in this kind of thing. So this is where the New Jersey Business Immigration Coalition plays a vital role. Not only are we working to build bipartisan support for effective immigration reform, we are also trying to gather and disseminate the best research on immigration topics and to arrange educational programs like this one in order to move us in the right direction with immigration policy. Over the last 4 years and operating on an all-volunteer basis, we have grown to a membership of 50 organizations. We are striving right now to not only double our membership, but to secure resources to allow us to hire core staff for our organization. If you are with an organization that would like to join NJBIC, or if you have resources or information to advance the work of the organization, please contact us either at the email address or at the web address. There is no fee to join. You just have to agree with our mission and principles, and they're found on our website. We would welcome any comments that you might have about today's program and any suggestions for future educational programs. Well, it comes now to thank you all. Thank you to our sponsors, the Genova Burns Law Firm, and to NJBIA, our partner in this webinar, and to you for joining us today, and thank you for bringing your good comments. Thank you so much. Hope to see you at another program. Bye-bye.